the situation here. This is a paragraph from one of the famous books of the John Perkins, Economic Hitman. Economic hitmen are highly paid professionals who cheat countries around the globe out of trillions of dollars. They funnel money from the World Bank, the U.S. Agency for International Development, and other foreign aid organizations into the coffers of huge corporations and the pockets of a few wealthy families who control the planet's natural resources. Their tools include fraudulent financial reports, rigged elections, payoffs, extortion, sex, and murder. They play a game as old as empire, but one that has taken on new and terrifying dimensions during this time of globalization. I should know. I was an economic hitman. John Perkins.
Yeah, I had many Iranian friends, still do, and I'm glad to see this many more amongst you here. It's just really wonderful to be with you, and I'm really grateful for this opportunity to talk to you, especially at this time when, can everybody in the back room hear? Is this working okay? I like the music, you know. Especially at this time when there's so much friction between our countries and within our countries, within Iran itself, within the United States, and between these two great nations. And it's really time that we all came together to solve some of these problems. I think it's fair to say, actually, that we, in the world today, are in the midst of a revolution. It's an incredible revolution. I think it may be one of the most important revolutions in history. It's when you talk about the importance of a revolution, you get the fanfare, so they strike up the band over here. It's like one of those late night show guys say, "Okay, Oliver, hit the notes." I think this revolution is on the same scale as the agricultural revolution, the industrial revolution, the time when we discovered that the world was not really flat and that the sun did not revolve around us, that we revolved around it. These are amazing times in human development and human history. We're in one of those times today. We're at a time where we know that we're in a very severe crisis. Less than 5% of the world's population live in the United States, and we consume more than 25% of the world's resources. And the world's starving. We've seen what's happened to the oil prices. We're looking at climate change. We're looking at terrorism and war. We know that we must do something differently. So this is a very important time for us to recognize that. And amazing things are happening around the world, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. But first I'd like to say that my objective for being here tonight is really that we can come together as many different peoples, and particularly the Iranian and U.S. communities, and that all of us can look at where we each as an individual and as a group can go to help this revolution, to change this world, to create a world that will truly be one that I just have a new grandson. He's 8 months old today or yesterday, and committed to doing the right thing, to doing the practical thing, to doing what must be done, and that is for each one of us to take the steps that each one of us, you can take to change this world, and we each have a great deal of power. But before I get into that, I'd just like to share a couple of stories that I think kind of hopefully bring a little humor to this, and also some points. I'm recalling one time when it was like the second time I went to Iran, and I'd probably been to Iran many dozens of times in the 70s, but I think this was my second trip. And I was going to be going down to Persepolis after I was going to fly to Tehran. First I spent a night in Rome on the way over. And in Rome, I went to this bar, and it's all these Italian people, and they're all speaking Italian. And I don't speak Italian, but I speak Spanish quite fluently, and I understood a lot of what they were saying in Italian. There's enough similarity between the languages. So when the bartender came over to me, I started speaking Spanish to him. And he gave me this nastiest look. And he said very good English, "I don't speak Spanish, but I do speak English." And I said, "But there's such a, if I speak Spanish to you, can't you speak Italian?" No, he said, "I can't, I won't understand a word you say." So I got a lesson there. So a few days later, I'm in Persepolis, and there's nobody there except me and some archaeologists, Iranian archaeologists. And they're off digging, and they take a lunch break. I'm just wandering around. I go over to try to talk to them, and none of them speak English. But one of them spoke Italian. And I spoke Spanish, and he spoke Italian, and we had a great conversation. So there's a lesson, you know. Where there's a will, there's a way. It's all about mindset. It's all about mindset. All about mindset. And since then, I do workshops in Italy. I've done it every year for 15 years, and I often speak Spanish, and they speak Italian, and we get along quite well. Another story, at one point, I had done a lot of work with indigenous cultures in South America. And at one point, I got very, very ill. I lost about 35 pounds in a week, and I was deep in the campo, in the jungles. And I was dying, and I couldn't leave to get to the doctor because I was a long ways away from the city. I just wasn't able to do the 2-day walk that would have taken to get there. And this guy comes up to me, leading an old man by the hand, this really decrepit-looking old man. He leads up to him and he says, "This guy's a shaman." And I'm like, "Well, what's a shaman? You know, I'm from New Hampshire, you know." And he says, "He can hear you." And I said, "Oh, well, okay, I'm really sick at this point. I'm very, very weak." And the shaman looks me up and down, and he says, "You're dying." And I said, I know it. And he said, "Well, that's good," because he believed in reincarnation. And he thought I was pretty pathetic in this life. It was probably time to move on to the next life. And I think I started crying at that point, and looking very sad. And he says, "Well, maybe you're not ready to die yet." And I said, "No, I'm not." And he said, "Well, the alternative is I could heal you tonight." And I thought I'd take that. That seemed like a good idea. So that night he does this shamanic ceremony, and he takes me on this shamanic journey, which is like a dream journey. It's this very powerful journey. And on that journey, I saw that I grew up in New Hampshire, as I said, in a very conservative Yankee culture, 300, 400 years of Yankee Calvinists in New Hampshire. We ate meat and potatoes, no onions, no spices, nothing. And my mom and dad taught me that if I ever ate any strange foods, it would probably kill me. If I got my feet wet in winter, it would kill me. Now I'm living with these indigenous people in Latin America where we're reaching into tree trunks and pulling out squirming white grubs and eating them. And they make this kind of beer, which is their main drink, that's made by women chewing manioc and spitting it in a ferment, which is actually very good because it kills germs. And the waters are polluted by organic matters in the jungle. But anyway, every time I ate these foods or drank this beer, I could hear my mother behind me saying, "It'll kill you." So it was killing me. And that night, in the shamanic journey, I saw how the indigenous people I was living with were so healthy. The men were all built like Rambo, you know. And the women, very, very sexy and beautiful. And some of these people lived to be very, very old. So it's like, gee, something's wrong here. You know, my parents must have had it wrong. There's something wrong. These people are eating these foods. They're fine. So why can't I? I get the wrong paradigm. I just got to change my viewpoint. And the next day, I was healthy, and I never got sick again. And I tell those two stories, which are both about viewpoint, both about mindset, because I think that's where we are today. We're at this situation where we have this world that's in deep trouble, deep crisis, It's sick. The world isn't so sick. It's human societies and our relationship to the world that's sick. And what we must do is change our perception. We have to change the mindset. And I think that's really all it's going to take. And that's what this revolution is about. It's about a mindset change. And before I get deeper into that mindset change, which I will talk about in a minute, just like to discuss a little bit about economic hitmen. You know, what is an economic hitman? What do we do? And I think it's fair to say that during the last several decades, we economic hitmen have managed to create the world's first truly global empire. And I know the Persians thought they created the first truly global empire back a long time ago, and it was at the time in the world that you knew, but this one truly is global. And we've done it. We created this empire primarily without the military. For the first time in history, an empire created primarily without the military, through economics. So what's economic hitman? And the way we do this, there's many different ways, but perhaps the most common is that we identify a third world country that has resources our corporations covet, like oil in Iran back in the 60s, or maybe before in the 50s. And then we arrange a huge loan to this country from the World Bank or one of its sisters. But the money never actually goes to the country. Instead, it goes to our own corporations, which build big infrastructure projects in their country. Power plants, industrial parks, highways, things that benefit a few rich people. And you really saw this in Iran during the time of the Shah, where this was going on. And things that benefit a few rich families in that country, as well as our own corporations, which are the main beneficiaries. But don't help the majority of the people who are too poor to buy much electricity, or have cars to drive on highways, or don't have the skills to get jobs in industrial parks. But they, the country, is left holding this huge debt. It's such a big debt that they can't possibly repay it. And so at some point, the economic hitmen go back to this country and we say, listen, you can't pay your debts, so give us a pound of flesh. Sell your oil real cheap to our oil companies, or vote with us on the next critical United Nations vote, or send troops in support of ours to some place in the world like Iran. And in this way, we've created this empire. On the few occasions when we fail, and I talk in my books about how I failed personally with Omar Torrijos in Panama and Jaime Roldos in Ecuador. When we fail, the jackals step in. And these are people who either overthrow governments or assassinate the leaders. So when I failed in Ecuador with Jaime Roldos and in Panama with Omar Torrijos, both of these presidents were assassinated by CIA-sponsored jackals. On the few occasions when the jackals fail, as well as the economic hitman, and this is what happened in Iraq, then and only then does the military go in as a last resort. It's always there in the background, but it only goes in as a last resort. And so in this way, we've really managed to create this empire, and we've done it secretly. So when Persia created its empire back 300, 400 years before Christ, everybody knew what was happening. The armies went out. The same with Rome and Greece and Egypt. The same with England and Germany and France and the Spaniards and the Portuguese. They sent their armies out and they conquered lands. And everybody knew this was happening. And they took pride in it. They said they were doing it to expand civilization, spread some religion. People took pride. It was done openly. This empire has been created in secret. Most people living in the United States don't realize that we're living off the fruits of a vast empire that exploits people around the world and resources, enslaves people. And, you know, we were talking earlier tonight at dinner with a group of us, several Iranians and me, and talking about how you can probably talk to the man on the street in Tehran, and I find you can do the same in Quito, Ecuador. People that aren't particularly well educated, and they know a lot more about what's going on in the world than the man on the street in this country who may have a master's degree or a PhD. And it's amazing how poorly educated we are in the United States. So we don't know that we got working under this empire. And to me, that's a huge concern because we claim to be in a democracy. But a democracy is based on the premise that the electorate is informed. And if the electorate doesn't know this most basic part of our foreign policy, it isn't informed. And if it isn't informed, how can it vote intelligently? And if our electorate can't vote intelligently, how can we be a democracy? I mean, I am concerned about Chads and rigged elections. I live in Palm Beach County, Florida, home of the Chad. And that's a concern. But I think a bigger concern now is the fact that we are so poorly informed in this country as to what's going on. So I think an important question is, if we are an empire, and there's no doubt we are, in the secret history of the American empire, I defined an empire. I traveled around the country several years ago talking to university students. We came up with this definition of empire that had 7 parts. The United States meets every one of them. As an example, 5% of the world consuming 25% of the resources and exploiting the world to get those 25%. The English language is the language of commerce and diplomacy around the world. The currency, the dollar, is the only thing you can buy oil with officially, despite the oil burst in Iran and the attempts in Venezuela and Iraq. But today, really, you can only buy it for the dollar. Our culture, our movies, and so on, these all point to us being an empire. The one really kind of question that hangs out there is, who's the emperor? Because an empire has to have an emperor. And an emperor is not elected, doesn't serve a limited term, and reports to no one, which really doesn't define our presidents. But it does define a group of people that I call the corporatocracy, people who run our biggest corporations. This is not a conspiracy theory. These people don't have to get together to conspire to do anything illegal. But they do run our country, basically, and in fact the world. They control the press, either directly or indirectly, the mainstream press. There's some good alternatives coming up now. A lot of people, as I walked in and talked about seeing me on Amy Goodman. How many people here watch Amy Goodman? All right. Yay for Amy. So we have alternatives like Amy and many others. But in general, the heads of our big corporations control the press. They control our politicians because nobody gets elected in this country without a lot of money. And most of it comes either through the corporations or their major stockholders, and also lobbyists have phenomenal power. I just learned the other day that the pharmaceutical industry alone has 2 lobbyists for every congressman in the U.S. Congress. Just the pharmaceutical industry. So this corporatocracy is very much in control. And again, it's not a conspiracy. They don't have to conspire. They all have one goal, one single goal that drives every decision they make. And that goal is to maximize profits regardless of the environmental and social costs. Maximize profits regardless of the environmental and social costs. And driven by that, they all have this very common goal. They execute it differently. Oil companies look at it differently from chemical companies that look at it differently from companies that make our clothes and those that make our cars or food, but they all have this goal. And in a way, this makes transformation easy. I am extremely optimistic that we can really turn things around. We don't want this empire to collapse. It's in the throes of collapse today. But history tells us that empires always collapse. And when they do, you get a void. And then you have wars, economic wars, physical wars. And out of that, a new empire emerges, which usually isn't any better than the last one, often worse. We don't want that to happen this time. We want to do something that's never been done before. Break the mold. Change the pattern. Transform this empire into a model that can serve us, our children and grandchildren. What we must do is create a world that's environmentally sustainable, just, and peaceful. So turn this around, not get rid of the old system, but transform it into something we've never seen before. And I think we're in a unique position to do it, you and I, all of us here tonight. What we must do is to convince the corporatocracy, the big corporations, that they can go ahead and maximize profits, but only within the context of creating a sustainable, just, and peaceful world. Maximize profits, but with social and environmental responsibility. That's just that change of mindset. It's what I experienced when I went from almost dead to totally healthy. It was just a mindset change. Or when we finally discovered that, Italians can communicate with Spaniards, basically, that we could do that. It's just that little change of mindset. And it often comes out of total necessity. And we have total necessity. It came out total necessity there in Persepolis. I wanted to talk with these people. And it came out of necessity for me when I'm dying. And right now we have this necessity. We must move from our adolescent view, a worldview that's based on colonization, to a mature view that's based on a recognition that we are one species, and a very fragile one, and a very interconnected species on this planet. We must move, we must elevate ourselves. We must create a new consciousness. We must evolve into the stage where we can see that in order for any of us to survive, we've all got to get together and survive well. And so, unlike other times in history, revolutions have occurred through violence. This one doesn't need to. Because what we're talking about is turning corporations around, getting them to move from the concept of maximizing profits, regardless of social and environmental costs, to maximizing profits while adhering to good environmental and social criteria. Just turn that around. We've had tremendous success, incidentally, at changing corporations on specific issues. So, for example, the Potomac River out here. When I was an economic hitman back in the 70s, it was terribly polluted. And I couldn't walk next to the Charles when I went to college in Boston because it stank so badly. There were rivers in the Midwest of this country that were burning on fire with pollution. Not anymore. We got the corporations to clean them up. We got the corporations to get rid of aerosol cans that were destroying the ozone layer. We got them to open their doors wider to African Americans and other minorities and to women. We recently got McDonald's and Kentucky Fried Chicken to get rid of trans fats in their foods, and Tyson's Chickens to get rid of antibiotics in their chickens. We've had amazing success at turning corporations around when we zeroed in on them and made demands. Now we just need to ratchet that up a notch and say, let's change the general goal here. It's not a big change. We can still maximize profits, but only within the context of creating a sustainable, just, and peaceful world. We have incredible power because this empire, which incidentally, like all emperors, is not elected, doesn't serve a limited term, and really doesn't report to anybody except us. It does report to us because these corporations cannot exist unless we buy their goods and services. When every one of us stops buying anything made in a sweatshop, nothing will be made in sweatshops anymore. When we stop buying cars that aren't really fuel efficient, there will be no more cars made that are not really fuel efficient. And it's important each time we do that, when we make the decision not to buy something made in a sweatshop, to let the company know why we're not buying their product, and to let the company know that we buy the product from why we are buying their product. And often it's important not to buy any product, to cut back on that, to minimize, but to send the word out, to sell each other books, songs, yoga, dance, portrait, rather than material goods. So I'm very, very optimistic that we can turn this thing around and create a world that my grandson will be proud to inherit. You know, I look at him, this 8-month-old baby, and I think, what is this world going to be like when he's 95, like me? Please laugh. You're a somber group here. This is kind of a somber song. It's hot in here, too, isn't it? What is this world going to be like when my grandson is my age? And I think it can be a very, very beautiful world. We just need to make that happen. You and I, we need to make that happen. You know, the other thing that gives me hope, and in a few minutes I'll turn this over to discussion and questions and answers because I'm interested in hearing where you're coming from. The other thing that gives me hope is the knowledge that I know a lot of CEOs and other upper management people in corporations. I've never met one who wants to see Florida sink beneath the ocean. I've never met an executive who wants to see the ozone layer destroyed or more terrorism. I only meet executives who have children and grandchildren and nieces and nephews and want to see us create a better world. But the problem is that they go through business school and they come up through the corporation being taught this paradigm, this mantra, maximize profits regardless of social and environmental costs. We have to change the mantra, maximize profits, while creating a sustainable, just, and peaceful world. And I think they're all on our sides out there. And I'd like to share with you a little story that I think highlights that. How many people here have heard of Rainforest Action Network? Good organization that's changed, had incredible success. In fact, it's never lost a campaign. It's changed some of the world's biggest corporations, Boise Cascade and Citicorp and Kinko's and Home Depot, huge organizations that it's forced to sign agreements that they will no longer be irresponsible in cutting rainforests, that they won't cut rainforests in essence. And a few years ago, RAM went up against Mitsubishi. And Mitsubishi at the time was the world's worst cutter of rainforest. Most people don't know that. It's a huge conglomerate. And the campaign between Rainforest Action Network and Mitsubishi got really ugly between two individuals, the founder of Rainforest Action Network, Randy Hayes, and a high executive at Mitsubishi. They went head-to-head. It was nasty. They really clashed on a personal basis. In the end, Rainforest Action Network won. They won every campaign. And up until recently, they've done this with a staff of 20 people and a budget of $2 million a year. It doesn't take a lot to change the world. They won this campaign. Mitsubishi signed the agreement. And a few months later, I happened to be at a conference where these two gentlemen were both there. The Mitsubishi guy and the Rainforest Action Network guy, and it was a small conference, about 30 people in Santa Barbara, California. And I noticed on Saturday morning, we took a coffee break. These guys had been ignoring each other, avoiding each other. Took a coffee break, and they both, I see them, I'm watching them, they're both heading for the coffee urn. They see each other coming toward the coffee urn, and they just bounce off. You know, like what happens with a magnet, you know, fluids of a magnet. They just avoided each other. And later that afternoon, that evening, a Saturday evening, Randy Hayes and I decided to go up to the top of the mountain where there was a hot tub, and there was going to be a close to full moon that night over the Pacific, and we decided to take a six-pack of beer to the hot tub and exchange stories about the rainforest, because we both spent a lot of time there. So we head up to the hot tub, and we get there, there's this full moon, we get this six-pack of beer, and we get to the hot tub, and there's somebody in it. The Mitsubishi executive. And I don't think he really wanted to do this, but what else could he do but invite us in? So, you know, we strip down, get into the hot tub. He's got his six-pack of beer there, too. There's now 2 six-packs of beer, full moon over the Pacific, hot tub, 3 naked men. 2 of them arch enemies. I'm the only one in between these 2 guys, and I'm a little worried. What's going to happen? Well, after a while, the Mitsubishi executive raises his beer can. He says, Randy, I want to thank you. I get kids. I hope to have grandchildren. I want to take them to the Amazon and to the other great forests of the world. And a lot of other Mitsubishi executives felt the same as I did for a long time, but nobody dared do anything. We're just afraid we'd lose our jobs. Until you and your people brought it to our attention, to the attention of our stockholders and our board of directors, that we needed to do something. At that point, we could really go in and fight for the right thing. So thank you. And I submit to you that there's executives all over this country, all over the world, that have that same feeling, that want to do something different. It's up to us to make that happen. And as I'm sitting here looking out at this audience, which I think is to a large degree a combination of Iranians and people from the United States, and in many cases you're a combination of those, you're Iranians who are now citizens of the United States, I'm really struck by the power of this, because one of the things that I felt in living, I presume I lived for more than 2 years in total in Iran. I'm not sure, it was many different trips. I was so impressed by the powerful traditions of Persia, of Iran, the philosophy, the eruditeness, the intelligence, and you had the Bedouin that I mixed it up with sometimes in the desert between Kirman and going down to Bandar Abbas in that area. And you had the people of the Caspian. You had such tremendous, varied peoples, and yet they come together and over centuries continue to forge a civilization that was truly, truly outstanding in so many ways, and at times the world's greatest power at its times. And here in the United States, we've got something similar. We have these amazing sacred documents, the Declaration and the Constitution, that are amazing, incredible documents. And we've actually emerged from World War II, I think, as kind of the world's hero and defender of liberty and democracy. And then something happened. I think we get subverted by subversives. But we've got these two incredible cultures coming together here, and I know there's other cultures in this room too. I know there's a lady from Poland and a man who's just been living in Sweden, and we've got lots of people. We've got so many traditions. Talk about revolution in Poland. That come together, and so this is an amazing opportunity for us to come together and do something remarkable. You have incredible power. You do. Each one of you. You have amazing power. Every time you buy something or decide not to buy something, you're exercising incredible power. I frankly think this next presidential campaign is important, and your vote is important, but I think more important than voting in the presidential campaign is the way you vote every time you go to a store. Every time you buy an apple, every time you buy a pair of shoes or anything, you're voting in a very substantial way. It's very important. Every time you speak to a neighbor, you're voting. And no matter who gets elected president of the United States the next time around, he or she is not going to be in a position to do very much unless we force them. Because the next president is going to be very beholden to big money, big corporations, to the Congress, which is beholden to big money, big corporations. I don't care who the president is, and to lobbyists. But we have to direct things because those lobbyists work for the corporations, and they're vulnerable to us. The corporations report to you. They report to you. And it's important for us all to really comprehend this, to understand this. Growing up in New Hampshire, I grew up in a really tiny town of about 1,000 people, and I had no idea as a kid that African Americans in my country had to ride on the back of the bus until Rosa Parks taught me that. How many people here have heard of Rosa Parks? Well, who the hell was Rosa Parks? She's you. She's you. You can ride on the front of the bus. And incidentally, after Rosa Parks rode on the front of a bus, a few weeks later, a bunch of people got together in various churches in Montgomery, Alabama, and they formed an organization. They elected its first president, somebody nobody ever heard of before, Martin Luther King Jr. Rosa Parks brought up Martin Luther King Jr. by riding on the front of the bus. You can ride on the front of the bus. And as a kid growing up in New Hampshire, I had no idea that the DDT I was spraying on the swamp behind my house to kill mosquitoes was also killing birds and fish until Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring. How many people have heard of Silent Spring? She started a whole global environmental movement. Who was Rachel Carson? She's any one of us. And how many people here have heard of Richard Davis and Jack Woodbury or Mrs. Schneer? Oh my God. That's really sad. Jack and Richard were my high school English and history teacher. And Mrs. Schneer was my third grade teacher. And they, without them, I wouldn't be standing here tonight. My books now have sold millions of copies. Last week, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, I was #2 in Japan. And millions of people have read those books. And those three teachers of mine are in every book. Mrs. Schneer, my third grade teacher, taught me to stand up to a bully. He was this big kid, stayed back about 5 years in school. He was huge, and he pushed me around a lot. And I'd go running to Mrs. Schneer, and she'd speak to him, but it didn't do any good. He kept pushing me. And so finally she says, "Johnny, you got to do it yourself." And I'm like, "But he's big." And she said, "Well, that's okay. Just kick him in the shins and run like hell." I don't think she said hell, but I did it. And a funny thing happened. He cried. And then he became my friend and my protector. And had I not learned that lesson, I wouldn't be standing here in this microphone tonight. I wouldn't have written these books. So Mrs. Schneer has impacted millions of people. She doesn't even know it. I don't know what happened to her. I don't know. She probably maybe still alive. I don't know. But she's had a huge impact. You do. When you walk out of this room today, you may be talking to the next president of Iran, or the United Nations, or General Electric. Every time you speak to someone, you're having an impact. Every time you buy something, you're having a huge impact. And so what can we each do? What can you do? Well, that's part of it, that incredible impact you have. In the Secret History of the American Empire, I have a long list of things we can all do and should do. Most of us know all these things already. Don't buy anything made in sweatshops. Don't drink water from Fiji. Don't buy cars that are not fuel efficient, etc. There's a long list. We all know that we all should do these things. We must do these things. It's really important that we do these things. But beyond that, you as an individual, beyond the basic things that we all must do, you have passion and you have talents. I don't know what they are. I have a passion for writing. I hope I have a talent for writing. You have passions. You have talents. Use those passions and talents to create a sustainable, just, and peaceful world. Change the corporations. Join organizations. They're very powerful. Like if you like children's rights, join organizations that protect children's rights. If it's animal rights, animal rights. If it's rainforest rights, rainforest rights. Whatever your passion is, because if we don't follow our passion, we don't follow through. You've got to go with our passion. So go with your passion, whatever it is, and your talents, but constantly work toward creating this sustainable, just, and peaceful world. We can all walk down different paths, but let's all go for the same destination. Again, growing up in New Hampshire, I come from 300-400 years of Yankees in New Hampshire. My ancestors fought the American Revolution and every major war. Oh man, it really breaks my heart today, walking into the U.S. Capitol and seeing the number of police officers and the number of barracks and walls and things around it. It just seems so out of character with what my ancestors fought to defend. But anyway, I was steeped in the history of the American Revolution, and I've so often thought how very, very fortunate we are that Tom Paine did not try to lead armies. And George Washington did not try to write pamphlets. You know, Paine had a passion and talent for pamphlet writing, and Washington had a talent and pamphlet for leading armies, and Martha Washington had a talent and passion for making clothes and sending things to the forefront, getting women to make clothes and send things to the forefront, and little children made bullets for the soldiers, and everybody took different paths. They followed their passions and did what they had talents to do, but they were all headed toward a common goal, and that's where we need to be again here today. All of us. Each one of you has incredible passions. You have passion. You have talents. And so let's come together, and let's particularly honor tonight this bringing together of the Persian, the Iranian culture, and the American culture, and these two great nations, these two great civilizations, these two great cultures, these two great traditions that can come together. I mean, you know, I think about Mossadegh back in 1951, you know, democratically elected president, premier, prime minister of Iran, the hope for the world. He was Time Magazine's Man of the Year in 1951, the Iranian prime minister. He was the hope for the Middle East. And he said, Iranian oil ought to be used to help the Iranian people. We demand more of the profits. The oil companies got to give us a bigger share. Imagine that. We couldn't handle it. The British couldn't handle it. And so the CIA, Kermit Roosevelt, overthrew this democratically elected president of Iran and replaced him with the Shah. I saw and thought, what would the Middle East be like today if instead we honored his dream? We'd gone in and helped Mossadegh and helped that be promoted throughout the Middle East. And today we see something similar happening in Latin America. 9 countries representing more than 80% of the population of South America have in the last democratic elections voted in a candidate who's run on an anti-corporatocracy ticket who said, Ecuador's oil ought to help Ecuador's poor people. Bolivia's gas ought to help Bolivia's poor people, not the big corporations. They're not saying not the big, let them help the big corporations too, but give a fair share back to our people. And not one of these presidents is saying, we want foreign aid. They're saying, we don't want your foreign aid. We just don't want you to pass more laws that make it impossible for our people to benefit from our resources, that make it so easy for your corporations to exploit us. 9 countries. And every one of these countries during most of my lifetime was run by a brutal dictator. Every one of these countries was run by a brutal dictator during most of my lifetime. And that dictator was under the thumb of Washington. And yet in the last few years, every one of them in a democratic election has voted in a president that's standing up. And they've done it peacefully. There's been no violent revolution. It's a revolution of the mind. It's a revolution in the marketplace. It's a revolution in the voting polls. And it's amazing. And 2 of these presidents, Argentina and Chile, are women. And I think that's very important too, because if we're going to change this paradigm, we've got to bring in that deep feminine, the receptivity, the nurturing aspect, because if we do it through the old patriarchal model, you know, we may get change, but we're also probably ultimately going to end up back in the same mess. So in Chile and Argentina, you've got 2 amazing women who are deeply committed to feminine principles. They're not women trying to be men. They're true women, being women, and doing an amazing job at it. And I think Latin America holds out a beautiful model for the world in the future. I often think and the other thing, very diverse groups came together. For example, in many of these countries, the indigenous people in the military have been at loggerheads since the time of the Spanish conquest. These groups came together in this last election. They joined forces to vote in a candidate that will most help their people and their children. If they can do that, can't Sunnis and Shiites and Israelis do it? Can't they get along together to create a better place for their world? Can't the various factions and tribal groups in Africa do it? Can't we in the United States do it? We can and we must. And so I'm going to bring this to a close because I want to hear your comments and probably get into more about Iran and so on. But I just want to end by saying that, well, actually I'd like to end by reading a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. It's Martin Luther King calling now. Cell phones make for good talks. You know, it's a little daunting to stand before a microphone and try to pretend you're Martin Luther King Jr. The way he spoke was so incredible. So I'll just read it. I won't try to repeat it the way he would have. But King said, "I refuse to accept the view that mankind is so tragically bound to the starless midnight of racism and war that the bright daybreak of peace and brotherhood can never become a reality. I refuse to believe that. Rather, I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word. Unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word." And I submit to you that that's why you're here tonight. Why did you come here tonight? Why are we all here together tonight? Why are these Iranian and U.S. communities and other communities come together here tonight? I submit that it's in order to speak that unarmed truth and share that unconditional love. And so again, I say, you know, as we walk out of this room, if each one of us will commit to the unarmed truth and the unconditional love, if as we walk out, you look at your passions and talk to your neighbors about, share with them, this is my passion and this is my talent, and this is how I'm going to help us get to a sustainable, stable, just, and peaceful world. We'll each commit to that, and we can all walk down separate paths, but when we head to that same destination, we're bound to find it. And I really look forward to joining all of you in that process. Thank you.
Interested to you about Iran, and you made several trips. These trips were just to visiting, or there was a...
I'll repeat. He's asking why I went to Iran. Was it just tourism, just because I was interested, or why did I go? And I was an economic hitman, and I was basically working for the Shah.
Is that so?
At the time, yeah. And what we were in the process of doing was arranging for Iran to use its oil money to hire U.S. corporations to make Iran, to change, industrialize Iran, to modernize Iran. It was part of the whole economic hitman thing. Iran was an exception because in so many countries we had to arrange loans from the World Bank and other organizations and use the oil or whatever the resources were in the country for collateral. The oil was still in the ground. But in the case of Iran, the oil was being pumped, so actually Iran had the money anyway, so they could just hire us directly. Basically, we were striking deals with the Shah and his people to get his money to hire our corporations to westernize Iran, in essence, or to create development, as we would put it, in Iran.
How did we do it?
How did we do it?
Yeah, how about the design?
Let me just interrupt the tradition.
Wonderful talk. I just wanted to mention to you that 3.5 years ago when I went to Iran, I bought your book and I read your book and I gave it to the longest held political prisoner of Iran, Mr. Abbas Amir. He sent me a note, a beautiful note, thanking me for the book. He had read it and he was very astonished by the book. He also said something when I was there. I'm sorry, I have to give you this brief sort of introduction. He said that prior to the revolution, sometime in 1978, he saw Mohandas Bazargan, who became the prime minister after the revolution. And of course we know that Abbas Amir was his deputy prime minister. And they were talking about the unrest that was going on in Iran, in Tehran and other cities. And Bazargan asked Amir Intizam, what's going on? Do you know where this unrest is coming from? And I know that we Iranians are usually very good at conspiracy theories. We come up with very good ones. And of course, considering our history, maybe it's not too far-fetched, but do you believe that the U.S. Or other powers had any role, since you also wrote in your book at least a chapter on Iran. Did they have do you think did they have a role in creating the unrest in different cities in Iran just prior to the Iranian Revolution? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Tarizi.
I'd like to say that I was a little bit disappointed when I came over here. This thought, according to Persia, that we were supposed to تاریخ مخفی امپراتوری آمریکا خواهستری what you call that
Okay, دوستان اجازه بدید. لطفاً شما صحبت کنید.
And then what's going to be American emperors in the future and how we can change it. But you didn't mention, so Martin just talked about the corporation, we knew that, but I thought that you would want to show us how we can work against this big emperor. But my main question was that you didn't finish answer is, what was your mission in Iran, and was mission accomplished or not? Thank you.
Before Mr. Tolliver talks, I want to recognize another author that here is tonight, Robert Dreyfus. He's a progressive author, and he's many books. He works for the nations. And
thank you very much again for repeat everybody else's accolades for your work. You've done a wonderful job, and I read your book a few years ago, and you passed around to anybody I could get my hand on. The question I had was in particular, obviously you had a massive change of heart 6-7 years ago, and made a decision to come out and basically show things that many of us here may already have kind of known about or read about, but hearing it out of the voice of someone who was there, as you said, a confession, was a much more powerful thing than reading about it elsewhere. The question I had was in particular, back in the era, particularly in the 70s and early 80s, before you chose to go into the private sector and kind of they bribed you away from confessing back then, as you mentioned in your previous book. Did you have others, or do you remember others such as yourself who tried to come out and show this, open the books, open the history books and the secrets on the corporate structure, indeed, that is indirect governance and indirect empire, as you mentioned? What was the reaction to that? Others who came out, because obviously now you're on the other side of the coin, and now you've come out, and I'm sure there's been reactions, some of which you talked about in your previous book, and I hope maybe more in your new book. So just that reaction of when you were on the one side and now when you're on the other. And also, another point on activism you brought up. And I wonder, what do you find, or what have you thought about is the most effective form of activism? Do you feel, I mean, you brought that up several times, that it's important for us to talk to others and kind of have these types of meetings so we can all become aware. But for a community like ours that is very aware, in essence, very well informed, and I think you touched on that about education, about knowing about the world, what are forms of activism that are actually effective versus forms of activism that really are kind of screaming into the wind and kind of thinking yourself okay? Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
thank you. John, you have 5 minutes.
That's it. Well, the first question dealt with, I hope I remember all this, U.S. role in the revolution. It was always mysterious to me exactly what did happen. I didn't have an inkling that there was going to be a revolution. In fact, my company lost a lot of money in Iran, and part of my problem was I didn't speak Farsi, and so everybody I was in contact with and got information from spoke English. So most of them worked for the Shah. They went to school in Europe or the United States, and they were basically government people for the Shah's people. So he got a very biased view, I've come to understand. And I talked in the book about how I was taking this secret meeting with this man named Doc, whose nose had been cut off, and he had been a top advisor to the Shah, and then it turned against him and understood that the Shah was betraying the people. And that was very shocking to me. I had no inclination that was coming. And then later I was kind of smuggled out of the country by the
man I'd gone to college with in the United States, an Iranian guy. His father was a general in the Shah's army, and he too had fled, the general, and was living in Rome. And then I began to get the idea, but it was very shortly after that the theaters were bombed and the revolution began. So we had no inclination, and my company was pretty powerful. I was always surprised. So I don't know if we had a role in the revolution itself. But I was always up that the one company that, as far as I know, never lost any money there and had a tremendous amount owed to them by Iran, as we did, but got it all out before the revolution, was Bechtel. And Bechtel had some very high-level consultants like Richard Helms, for example. And so it's as though they did know ahead of time. I don't have any personal information on the role the U.S. may have played in that revolution, but nothing would surprise me at this point. The question about my mission in Iran, I think I answered that. I worked for the Shah. My job was to get oil and use it for U.S. corporations to build infrastructure projects in Iran.
You work for America or Iran?
Please don't interrupt. Let the speaker talk. Please don't interrupt.
Let him talk.
I essentially worked for I worked for an American corporation. I was employed by an American corporation. The American corporation had a contract with the Iranian government. So you could say I worked for both. But then my checks were written on an American corporation. And many people were like that. And I think, we talked about the overthrow of Mossadegh, and that was done by a card-carrying CIA agent, Truman Roosevelt. But after that, from then on after, such things were done by people who worked for private corporations. The U.S. government hired their corporations to do something. And the same is true of the jackals, the assassins. And working on a book now about one of these jackals who went in to kill the president of that country. He now is working in Afghanistan, just came out of Iraq, and still works simply for the U.S. government, but he works for a private corporation, a security firm. The last person's questions were, first one about other people who made confessions. I was not aware of anyone who did at that time, and I haven't been. And I think one of the reasons that Confessions of an Economic Hitman did so well and has been on the New York Times bestseller list for so long and in so many languages is it was kind of a first as far as I'm aware. And that's what my publishers tell me too. Certainly when I was an economic hitman, I was not aware of anybody else confessing to what they were doing. There were some turncoats in the CIA, the real spy type of people like Philip Agee and others, but not as economic hitmen. I think I'm the first that really came clean. A lot of others are coming clean on it now. There's another book called The Game of the Golden Empire, which talks about a lot of them. And there have been a number of other books since mine came out where people talk about what they do. But previous to that, I wasn't aware of it. What is the most important type of activism and the most effective? I'm certainly no expert on activism. I'm a writer, but I think I'm here to inspire and to shed light on what I did and what my country did and to inspire you to go out and do whatever draws you. I think there's many, many forms of activism that work well, and it's what you put your passion into. I've seen consumer movements that boycott certain stores or products. I've seen organizations like Rainforest Action Network that are very effective in doing many different approaches to activism. So I think there's a lot of approaches that work, and there's no one single one that works best. It's whatever your passion is. Follow your passion. If your passion is to take to the streets and yell and scream and form picket lines and make a general nuisance of yourself and get thrown in jail, do it. It's very, very effective. It's been very effective many times throughout history. But if that's not your passion, if your passion is to be much quieter and just to talk to Aunt Sally at the dinner table and convince her not to buy an SUV, a gasoline SUV next time, but instead to buy a Prius, do it that way. Follow your passion. We need to do it our way. Some of us work different ways, and we all work different ways. So follow your passion, but be an activist, whatever that means. And an activist can simply mean being conscious every time you shop. You know, don't buy things. I want just a quick story. My daughter is very, very conscious, and she just had a baby, as I mentioned. Before she had the baby, she was looking at how she would buy things. And she called me one time when I'm on the road, and she says, you know, I found a crib for $200 that's made in China. I'm sure it's a sweatshop, but I don't know that for sure, but I think it is. I have another crib that I can buy for $600 that's made with Chilean plantation trees, certified with organic, and made in Canada, not sweatshop. Of course I'm going to spend the extra $400. She works for a nonprofit organization. She doesn't make much money. Money's dear to her. But she said that $400 is an investment in my child's future. It's not a sacrifice. I would spend $400 to buy a car seat for my child to protect its life in a car. I would spend $400 for a better education for my child. I certainly will spend $400 to make an investment in a world that's sustainable and just. And I think that's how we need to look at these things. You know, if you're tempted to buy an $8 t-shirt that's made in a sweatshop instead of a $20 one that isn't, maybe you don't need to buy either of them. Save up until you can buy the $20 one and realize it's not a sacrifice, it's an investment. And sometimes you may not be able to do that. Sometimes you can't afford to make the investment. But if that happens to you, tell yourself, recognize it, be conscious that you're foregoing an investment in your future and the future of your future generations. And commit yourself that when you do have the money, when you can do it the right way, you will do it the right way. But remember, it's an investment, not a sacrifice.
Thank you, John. Azita? Next person is Moses Amin, and next one is Boston. So please line up here at the microphone and saving time.
Thank you for being here. One of my questions is, what do you think about the think tank? What do you know about them? Like NASA Endowment for Democracy, American Enterprise, Washington Institute for Near East. And the corporation and the leader, and the way that we have to approach them, like they don't want their kids to be, you know, the rainforest, for instance. But for instance, the Iraq war, more than 1 million people so far died. Iraq is destroyed, and we know that the corporation...
These are the messages that I think I heard from your speech. And of course, by doing so, we are in fact redefining the concept of self-interest, which is the foundation of a capitalist economy such as the United States. If we are going to restrict the self-interest and redefine it, then actually we are going to be modifying other institutions which are dominating capitalist systems such as private properties. How are we going to handle that? How are we going to define the private properties? How are we going to regulate market economy, which is defined on the concept of self-interest and eventually maximization of the profit? My question is that, of course, once I told in my class to my students, isn't democracy that we know as of today, it might have a meaning one meaning in the United States, it might have another meaning on the other part of the earth. Isn't that in the United States that we tell the democracy to be free to brainwash by the media? I have seen so many times that, in fact, if we want to attack one country by the United States, first we want to create and make it as big as possible. That happened about Noriega. That happened about Saddam Hussein. We created a monster from Saddam Hussein. Then finally we attacked that. I want 1 more minute to stop it down.
Thank you. Long list.
Yeah, as I said, I have got long list of questions.
No, long list of people. So please.
So, isn't that, I will finish up one more. Isn't that kind of, we are saying democracy is free to be brainwashed. My particular question is that, how are we going to start this movement? You didn't show us the way. To me, it is a movement. But in other words, how the other nations, meanwhile, they cannot wait too long because as Keynes said, for an economist, in the long run, everybody is dead. So how should those countries, without knowing about these concepts, should fight back or should they stand still?
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Boston.
I'm not a teacher, so don't expect long lecture. Thank you for your lecture, although nothing is new. U.S. is not a democracy, it's an oligarchy. I want to tell you about the French writer in 2003.
Talk to the mic.
In 2003, Emmanuel Paul published a book, Après Empire, about the fall of U.S. empire. His prophecy seems to be fulfilled. Everybody practically agrees that U.S. is not going to be the great economic power of the future. It would be Brazil, India, China, and Russia. And even I had an article about the matter again last week. What's your view on that?
Thank you. Mr. Perkins, 5 minutes.
I think I'll start with the last question first. I may not remember all the others, but I try to draw them down here. But I think we're at a time in history when nation states are becoming irrelevant, whether it's Brazil or China, India. We think right now we're leveling the playing field because we've got all these other nations coming in, Russia, India, China, Brazil. But in fact, if we look at the globe, under the old system, which most of my life now, we have 180 some odd countries, and a few of these are very important: Soviet Union, U.S., and China. They influence lots of others. But today we better look at that globe to something quite different. The geopolitics could better be compared if we see huge clouds drifting around the globe. They don't know any national boundaries. These are the big corporations. So we're emerging into something like I said earlier tonight, where it's like when the city-states became nations. We're now leaving the nation-states behind, and we're becoming a corporatocracy. So that these big corporations will form alliances with Russian government, Russian companies, Chinese, Indian, Brazilian, U.S. The countries themselves are losing their importance. And I think in a way that opens the door for us to make change, because it means that for the first time in history, by going after this one organization, corporations, which are not militaristic for the most part, which are influenced by every time we go shopping, then we can change them. And these are run by men and women who, for the most part, have children and want to do the right thing. They're not run by people who have pathological personalities, dictators for the most part. There are some that are, but I don't know any chief executives that like that. I know quite a few. I'm sure there are some. There were some at Enron, I'm pretty sure. But they're a fairly small percentage of the population. And you know, probably in this room we've got a lot of people with husbands and wives and themselves who are executives of corporations. Mostly they're good people, but we need to change the paradigm, you know, as I mentioned earlier, to create a sustainable, stable, just and peaceful world while making profits. So the great economic power of the future is the corporations, and the future's here. And that's our leverage point, too. Media brainwashing, how to start a movement. There's no question of media brainwashing in this country. There is a huge movement on the internet, Amy Goodman and a lot of independent. And my book was on the New York Times bestseller list for almost a year and a half, and the New York Times never reviewed it. But that doesn't mean it didn't get read. It kept getting read and reread, and that's because of the internet for the most part, and a few independent journalists like Amy Goodman. So there is a movement underway. The gentleman who raised the question, I think that's really your job, that's your passion, to really look into that. I'm often kind of amused, you know, I'm a writer. I write about what I did, what I experienced as an economic hitman, and then I try to inspire people. I think there is a lot of hope for the future, but I don't pretend to have all the answers, or even most of them, specifically in each area where we need to go. That's why I say follow your passion. Mine is to write and lecture.
And the gentleman who raised this question, I think it would be really good for you to just start that movement. It is started. There's a lot of anti-corporatocracy media that's growing up out there. And be creative. Look at how you move into that. Look at where you go with that movement. Rally the forces. There's a lot of other people with you. So you do it. We've all got to go out there and do it. I can't give you any better advice than that at this point in that particular subject. And then with the question, corporations profit from wars. What can we Iranians do to prevent a war against Iran? What can all Americans do to prevent that war? I think, a couple of weeks ago, I spent an afternoon with Bob Baer, who is the CIA agent that the movie Syriana is based on. He was a very, very high level undercover agent in the Middle East. He speaks Arabic fluently. And he's very concerned that this current administration in the United States will start a war with Iran. And because if there's a war going on or the threat of one, then the U.S. population will vote for the fighter pilot, McCain, the Republican. I don't know, the U.S. doesn't really have an army anymore, which is overextended, so I'm not quite sure how we start that war, but I think it certainly is a concern. I think if we see this getting closer, all Iranians and all of us need to get together and take to the streets. We mustn't let that happen. We know that a war with Iran would be disastrous for everybody, and it would probably encourage more radicalism within Iran. It does that. It's done it in Iraq. These wars are not the successful way to solve the world's problems. They're futile. The only thing they do is they make a lot of money for big corporations. And that's what a lot of this is about. Most of us think we lost the war in Vietnam, but if you're a big corporation, you won that war. Same thing in Iraq. Big corporations are making a lot of money there. We mustn't let this country go to war with Iran. We mustn't let this country attack Iran. Every one of us at that point, if it comes down to really looking like that's going to happen, please, we're all join together and take to the streets. Lie down, if you live near Washington, you lie down in front of the Pentagon, lie down in front of the White House, lie down in front of the Capitol building. Don't let it happen. And think tanks, that's the last question. There's no general answer. There's good think tanks and there's bad think tanks. A lot of them are bad. But they often go in with a bias, but I can't speak for all of them. I mean, there's a lot of different ones out there. Some of them are doing some good work. A lot of them aren't.
Alan and Jessica next. Thank you for the books and thanks for coming in. I wanted to ask your opinion about how we can expose some of this current or future hits. And specifically, you mentioned South America. I was just visiting some of these 9 countries, and there are concerns that there are some of them exposed to some destabilization efforts. For instance, in Bolivia, all of a sudden a province, Santa Cruz, wanted independence, and also in Venezuela, there are efforts to destabilize Chavez. So where do you see them now? What stage are they now? Are these currently some hitmen working on, and then there will be the jackal, and then invasion? Or where do you see these some of this coming in our future? Thank you.
Thank you. Alan, is that here? Jessica?
First of all, thank you for your courage in doing everything that you've done. A lot of what I wanted has been answered in pieces, but there's a couple things I wanted to just present. One is that in terms of what needs to be done, when you talk about the mindset change, I think you don't go nearly far enough. Because maximizing profits, even if it's under an umbrella of responsibility, it's still part of the same mindset. It's the mindset of accumulation, hoarding, using people as means, seeing people incrementally. It's a materialist consciousness. Our whole economics and our whole economic system is based on a dehumanizing, soulless, Palestinian And I think that mindset has to, in fact, be the one of the indigenous cultures that are being displaced by this very corporatocracy. And those alternative models exist, but they're in these cultures that are being destroyed and the ways of life destroyed. And so what can we, again, that goes back to them, what can we do to save these cultures and in fact learn from them and be, have our souls returned. And when you talk about the buying, this has been raised in some ways, but two issues there. One is the information. It's so hard to come by, and not just on the buying, but also these huge systems. These systems are so much bigger than we are, and they're secretive, as you said. It would be a full-time job just to find out what's the right thing to buy, is, in the daily things that we have to do. How do we do that, and how do we understand what's really going on? And when we don't have, you are one person who's been inside and so that how do we get a system so that the systems can be at the level of the systems that we're combating? And one last thing on that is, how do we actually drop out? We are in these cities, we're not sustainable. It actually is those in these communities, indigenous cultures, where people can live without these systems. I grew up in the city, I don't know how to live. And I'm struck by it is in these Ghanaian villages and these indigenous villages where people come from there, they have a power in them of knowing that they can survive. And when you come up in cities, you say, I don't know how to do that. And I think there's so many people in America who feel so threatened about how to live. And so how can we drop out of a system where the whole system around us is so exploitative?
So, Rob?
And I would like to appreciate your coming and addressing this issue really at the national level. It's not something which was hidden from other people. But the question I have in terms of the hitman, I know that it has three phases. First, economic manipulation, second one is the cartel money, and third one is the military intervention. Is it a one-layer kind of thing, or a dumping, going back to the area which you were expert in or specialized in, and dumping a kind of Soros type of action in Argentina, going by the dollar and selling the Argentinian dollar and reducing, creating destabilization. Is it part of the whole scenario menu, or it is no one layer, it was not working to go to the second stage? And the other thing, it was tailor-made for the third world country or for all adversarial kind of relationship? Because it takes me to the second question, which is the coming to power of EU. Because Margaret Thatcher was really the counterpart of the Reagan in Europe. And the reason they removed her from office, not losing an election, was she didn't like to be subscribed to the being part of European banking system, and the interest rate be determined by the kind of collective objective instead of the national interest of the British. And I want to see that this is the same kind of plan diluted a little bit without the military intervention, which was part of question to go to Europe and England. But is it the same kind of plan? And the other last question goes back to the effectiveness of the same approach in nowadays world, which is one of the unique characteristics of this world is the decentralization of the decision-making. The decision-making process, it is not made at one point. The last, if I'm not wrong, reaction in Wall Street, it happened in Southeast Asia, in China, and then it returned back to China. This policy can be effective nowadays or not?
Okay.
It's kind of interesting, these three questions have turned into about 15, I think. Here. Three people with 5 questions each. Let's see, I'll try. The first question was about exposing current and future hits, and specifically in Latin America.
I just came from Latin America. I spent a lot of time in Latin America. I have 3 godchildren there, and I just came from Nicaragua, Panama, Costa Rica, Bolivia, Ecuador, and spent a lot of time with some of these new presidents. And every one of them is being threatened by an economic hitman. Correa of Ecuador, Evo Morales of Bolivia, Daniel Ortega of Nicaragua all told me that the economic hitmen are pounding on their doors. So every time one of these presidents gets elected, very soon after that, someone who looks like me, not very menacing, I don't think I'm real menacing looking, somebody that the president knows, somebody who speaks Spanish, someone's been hanging around the presidential palace for a long time, walks into the president's office and says, hey, congratulations, Mr. President, or Ms. President, in the case of Chile and Argentina. I just want to remind you, though, I can make you and your family very rich if you play our game. Or I can see to it that you're overthrown and killed if you don't. Now, he doesn't say that last question quite so bluntly that maybe a tape recorder running. All he really has to say is, and if you don't, we'll remember what happened to Arbenz of Guatemala, and Allende of Chile, and Lumumba of the Congo, and Mossadegh of Iran, and Diem of Vietnam, and Torrijos of Panama, and Rolos of Ecuador, and Noriega of Panama, and on and on and on. These presidents all know this. It's a very real threat. They're all having to live with this threat today. In Latin America, I think because 9 countries now are all together, they're forming alliances. Hugo Chavez has been a very strong force, and you can think what you like about Hugo Chavez. I don't particularly like the way he talks. I don't like his mannerisms all that well, but he's been a major force in holding all this together in Latin America. So I think it's hard now for us to do anything there, but these guys are all being threatened. And so what I would suggest for each and every one of you is write email. Emails are so easy. Write your representatives, local and national. Write corporations that are involved in any of these countries. Tell them that you want to defend democracy. Every one of these presidents is elected democratically, and every one of them, I believe, has been elected by a much greater majority than the President of the United States is elected by. These are democracies. I was shocked the other day. I picked up USA Today, and there was an article about Venezuela, and they started the article by saying the Venezuelan dictator Hugo Chavez. He's not a dictator. He was elected by overwhelming majorities time and time again. He lost one election recently and gave into it. He didn't try to overrule it. He's democratically elected. He's not a dictator. For the USA Today, to call him a dictator is a total lie, distortion of the worst sort. Let them know that. Defend these people. We must defend these presidents. You know, they can't defend themselves at this point. The people have spoken. But what's going on there is very, very important. Let your corporations know. Let your government know. Jessica, I disagree with you about maximizing profits because I'm a realist. I don't think in my lifetime I'm going to get corporations to stop making profits. So I'd rather use that approach to change the world. And in the long run, idealistically, I think you're right. But I don't think it's going to happen in my lifetime. Maybe you can make that happen, but I don't think I can. What I would rather do is use the profit motive to create a better world. So I just came back from Nicaragua. I was there with a group of investors, philanthropic investors. This includes Steve Demos, who created Silk, so he no company and sold it for a huge fortune, and really wants to use his money well. Includes the president of Whole Foods. Going down there, looking at investing money in campesinos in Nicaragua to grow organic food and sell it to Whole Foods and other companies up here. What we found when we were in Nicaragua is that most of the agricultural land has been destroyed by big agribusinesses, Dole, Chiquita, United Brands from the United States, and cannot be used organically. But there's equipment that will clean all that stuff up. The lakes of Nicaragua, there's 2 lakes you can't see across, huge water resources, they're all polluted. There's a $40 million boat that will clean that up. And there's a tremendous economy out there waiting. So what I would like to see happen, because I think this is realistic, and I agree with you on an idealistic level, but in my lifetime, what I would like to see happen is a share of our military budget in the United States going to pay the same companies, Raytheon, General Dynamics, General Motors, to, instead of building military equipment, build equipment that will clean up the polluted land of Nicaragua and every other country where we've done the same thing, which is practically every country in Africa and Latin America. Clean up the polluted lakes and water. Clean up the polluted air. Help people that are starving today to be able to grow and process their own foods. Let's use that system that's already in place, the very companies that are there now, get them off building weapons that can wipe out Iran or Iraq or anywhere else and they're killing people, and instead produce things that will make us a better world for our children. And I submit that the profit motive is an important one at this point to do that. And maybe we can change it later, but I don't see us getting these big companies off the profit motive now. But I do see us having them redefine the parameters of profit, and they can do that through the accounting system, which takes into account externalities, which internalizes what they call externalities. So I would push harder for that, and then in the long run, maybe we can create a world that doesn't have to be quite that oriented. You're talking about indigenous cultures. You know, I've spent a lot of time in them. I've written a number of books about them, and I could spend the whole evening talking about that. I don't know what to say, except they have so much to teach us about sustainability. And yes, they don't work on the profit motive. But they do work sometimes on the saving motive. So, you know, hoard things for bad times. Yeah, that's different. Regarding information on what to buy, it's not easy to get, but it's getting easier. There are a lot of websites in the Secret History of the American Empire. There are a number of pages in the appendix that list those. There's a good project for you. There's some passion for you. We need a lot more information. We need a lot more of that, and I think corporations are understanding it. There is a greening going on. I just came from Chicago, where there was a green festival, and there's one here this year, and tremendous numbers of people attend, and there's all these companies, entrepreneurs that are creating things that are green. None of them are perfect yet, but things are greening. Things are turning around. It is happening. There's an amazing thing happening. Walmart is really trying to become greener. It's not just greenwashing anymore, I'm convinced. It was for a while. They got a long way to go, but things are happening, and we do need more information. So I'd encourage you to help, get your students, get people to get together, and let's get a website that has it all right on that one website, because right now you got to go to a whole bunch of different websites.
Hey, Dad. Two more people there. Hey, Dad.
Hi. I enjoyed your speech. It was knowledgeable, useful, and it was great. But I also encourage you to continue. I hope I see your picture on back of the 10 box in the future, not in my time, in the next generation, like Alexander Hamilton.
On the back of what?
10 box speech. Not in my time, hopefully. I will have the $10. Oh, I do. No. But I have a little bit problem with your speech, a short sentence of that. You mentioned Dr. Luketti and Dr. Musafir, this and Alan and Shiri. These people, they were good people, they had good heart, don't question about it. But they mislead people. They mislead message. I mean, they mislead messages. What happened when times come, this, I call it imperialism, you probably call it a multi-million corporation. When times comes and they are in danger, they said non-violence, peace, but they get caught. That other way around, when times comes for them, you know what they did with Indian people in this country? They massacred 10 million of them. You know what they did in Vietnam? They massacred 4 million of them in Vietnam. You know what they do in Iraq now? They kill more than 1 million of them. But when times come and they are in danger, they say peace. That's why Dr. Luketti and Hannon and Musafir, they've been talking about it. I mean, non-violence. What non-violence? You have to buy student with student, stone by stone. There is no other choice. Some of these people, they mislead. That's it. Another thing, You cannot make peace between sheep and goat. There is no way. Goat wants sheep wants grass. This is nature law. There is no way you can make peace between two groups. So, imperialists and multi-million-dollar people or corporations, they want to suck your blood, people blood. But we don't want to give them blood. We want to be peaceful. We want to be equal. But they don't let us. They want to take advantage. As mentioned, they will make more profit, more profit, more profit. It is impossible. They make profit, and we don't give them blood, and they should be peace. How come? This is against the logic. Thank you.
Thank you, George. John, thank you very much for an inspirational speech. I want to address a thing you mentioned about sweatshop, goods that are produced by sweatshops. An implication of basically foregoing buying such goods is that those people who work in those sweatshops are probably not going to work there anymore. And for a lot of them, that is probably their first step out of subsistence that is not so sustainable. And since I think you agree that there's only one system, economic system, that seems to be working and has been working, and that is capitalism. We have to distinguish between good capitalism and bad capitalism. This is basically what we were trying to argue. What are the implications of that? Will that actually help the poor people in the third world or not? That's one. The other thing is that individual action is great, but also political action is very necessary. We got a lot of the laws that were passed in the 70s were a result of political action, and that actually is not to be forgotten. We're going to get fuel efficient cars and a lot of more fuel savings effects out of political legislation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Randy, last person.
Thank you for laying out for us the principles and the working of the capitalist system and the military-industrial complex without reducing it to a conspiracy. And the other thing I appreciate about your talk is to show us what we can do as individuals in terms of our buying habits and personal decisions. When it comes to a more fundamental solution to the problem, I'm not sure if I'm as optimistic as you are. We all know we're running out of time in terms of the great problems that are besetting this world. You didn't mention Russia, didn't mention China, didn't mention India. They came up in one of the questions by one of the speakers. That's where the action is moving, we all know that. The United States was the hegemon for 50 years, and now we're moving to China, we're moving to India. You mentioned that we live in a globalized world, and you seem very optimistic about the counter forces to nationalism. Things become blurry, like new development of what began as a city-states in Italy, so to speak. I'm not so sure if that's true. I do think that globalization and fierce, feisty, and potentially lethal nationalism can perfectly coexist together. They are coexisting together in the case of certainly China right now. It's a country that's run by autocrats. We look at Putin, Russia, another perfect example of an autocrat who's not only not willing to give up power, but he's proud of his democracy, and he gets his people with him. So do the Chinese, as long as they deliver the goods, they want to deliver political freedom. People want bread, they want to feed their families. They don't necessarily want democracy. That's a luxury for leaders, as we all know. These people are not going to give up power. And there's another element, I think, that's very important and hasn't been discussed, and that is, in those societies, and I hesitate to say cultures, there is no counter-narrative, there is no alternative tradition, there is no ideologically and philosophically underpinned system, notion of social justice, of redistributing wealth, for example. Forget about the native peoples of South America. They're interested, but they're a rearguard battle. They've lost. They can be inspirational to us, but they don't constitute the forces, the globalizing forces of today. So when we look at India, what does it offer in terms of counter-narrative? It has a set of otherworldly religions. It has a tradition of, it has a caste system. You look at China, which is marked historically by bureaucratic centralism. Slavery was in part abolished in the world, in the Ottoman Empire, in Iran because of British pressure. So it was a counter-narrative that worked in part together, but in part also against the imperial forces of Britain. There's nothing that's coming out of that part of the world as far as I can see. That's what I have to say.
Thank you. John, you have the last word.
I didn't really hear any question from the last speaker. We've had some great discussion tonight. I really appreciate that. I think there's been more discussion than questions, which is really helpful to me, and I really, really appreciate that. I would say, in regard to the last speaker, on the issue of optimism, it's a lot more fun to be optimistic than pessimistic. I enjoy life more where I think I can change things, and I'm also incredibly thankful that Tom Jefferson, Tom Paine, Martha Washington, George Washington, all those people that went up against the most powerful empire in the history of the world, the British Empire, which was their own government, I'm really glad they weren't pessimistic. I'm really glad they said we can do it. And they were up against terrible odds, worse odds than we're up against today, I think. An incredibly powerful empire. And in their own country, we did. The United States, we had Tories, we had loyalists, we had people who constantly said, we can't beat the British. Beat the British? Are you crazy? How could you possibly beat the British? It's our own government. I'm going to stand up, just getting tired of sitting. But, you know, the Americans here who went up against the British were traitors. They were terrorists. They stuck their heads in nooses. Every one of them, Washington, Hancock, Jefferson, they would have all been hanged if they had lost the American Revolution. We're not facing hanging. And they were not desperate people. Washington was probably the richest man in the colony. Hancock was very rich. Jefferson was very rich. And history tells us that the average farmer in the United States was a lot better off than the average farmer in Europe. These weren't desperate people. These were people who believed they could do something better, could create a better life for their children and grandchildren. I think we can do that too. I don't think we have any reason to be pessimistic. If we're going to be pessimistic and we say we can't do it, then of course we can't do it. But if we say maybe we can do it, I think we can do it, I know we can do it, let's do it. We are going to do it. And regarding the sweatshop issue, unfortunately, sweatshops are terrible for people. Nobody gains from a sweatshop because what happens, and I know this from personal experience, a company like Nike goes in and they start a sweatshop in a place like Indonesia, let's say. And they suddenly go out and they recruit people who are subsistence farmers, who make their own clothes, grow their own food, and they're living decent lives. But they never had a penny in their pocket. And so Nike says, here, we'll pay you $3 a day. $3 a day? That's a fortune. Come to the city, come work in our sweatshop. And so they do. And suddenly they're in a sweatshop where they're working 80 hours a week. They get 2 bathroom breaks. Women who are menstruating get 2 bathroom breaks. Everybody gets 2 bathroom breaks. So he's really sick, gets 2 bathroom breaks. They work 80-hour weeks. They make $3 a day. They can't grow their own food. They can't make their own clothes. They don't have time. They're exhausted when they get home. They're not better off. And then, a year later, Nike decides they can get cheaper labor in the Philippines. They close down a factory, and those people have no jobs. And they don't have a subsistence farm to go back to because someone else has taken it over, a brother, sister, somebody else. They don't have anything. They've been totally decimated. And this happens over and over and over again. The solution to that is to insist that Nike or whoever, I don't need to pick on Nike or a lot of others, pay a fair wage to these people. Pay for health care. Pay for retirement insurance. Give them bathroom breaks. Give them a decent life. And the 1970s don't need to make as much money. The stockholders maybe don't need to make quite as much. The CEOs in these companies are making outrageous amounts. Maybe we need to pay a little bit more. But to create that better world and to make sure that these people have a fair wage and are not desperate, because it's desperate people that become terrorists. I've met a number of terrorists. I've interviewed them. I've never met a terrorist who wants to be a terrorist. I've only met desperate people whose lands have been destroyed by oil companies, flooded by hydroelectric dams, who've been chased off their land and they can't feed their families, and so they take up a gun, but not one of them wants to carry a gun. I know there are crazies out there. Osama bin Laden may be crazy. There's always serial killers. We'll never do away with crazy people, but they will never have a following unless there's desperate people who we make desperate. We must turn that around, and sweatshops make people desperate. They don't need to be sweatshops. We can have the factories, give them good jobs, but let's pay them a decent wage. And I guess that probably pretty much brings us to a close. So what can I tell you?